Welcome to Pillow Talk with Misha, our co-host. As you can see, the point is to have these intimate conversations. Before we dive into how to become better at articulating yourself, I think it's worth exploring what it means to be articulate in the first place. The Oxford Dictionary describes being articulate as your ability to speak coherently and fluently and without the ums and ahs that we all know of. On a deeper level, what we hope to achieve when we say we want to become more articulate. Well, there's two ways to think about it. So one is the convention of being articulate, so it's to appear smart, and it's to appear like you know what you're talking about and appear so with the ability to use fancy words in what you're saying, words that are not so common. But I think that is a very superficial view of being articulate, which also leads to a very superficial fix of how to become articulate. So what does it mean to be articulate? I think when we are striving to become more articulate, what we're actually striving for is our ability to convey the ideas that are deeply buried in our minds. When something comes up, our ability to retrieve that information fast and to be able to find the right words to communicate that, but do so in a way that is still our opinion on what we're saying makes sense. And I think being more articulate comes as a byproduct of clear thinking, which is not emphasized enough. We focus on the superficial side of it where it sounds good, or it sounds like you know a lot, or you know fancy words, and so you get a superficial fix, which is to read more books, but just reading more books is not going to fix anything. It's not going to make you more educated, and neither is it going to make you more articulate, because being articulate is a byproduct of clear thinking. So people turn to reading books in hopes that they will become more educated and more informed, and as a result more articulate. But therein lies the confusion, therein lies the fallacy, because just by reading you are not going to become more articulate or smarter or be able to piece your opinions in a better way. For instance, I think reading a book gets you a little bit of an aha moment, a little bit of a moment where you're like, you have this false illusion that you're becoming more educated and that you can see an opinion in a better way. But it's a very it's a very transitory form of enlightenment, or a very transitory moment of like aha, like you read something and you're like, that's exactly how I would have said it, or that's exactly what I have felt or experienced but I've never been able to put into words. That's what a good book does. It kind of puts words to things that you feel, have experienced, or thought that you couldn't quite word yourself, which is why you resonate with it, which is why you like the book. But the point is that simply reading a book is not going to change anything about your situation. Now, of course, it could be argued that you keep rereading this book and regurgitate what is said in the book when a moment comes up where somebody asks you a question and you answer it by what you read in this book because it perfectly words your opinion. But then even when you say it, after you said it, you will not feel fulfilled and you will not feel like you've articulated what you wanted to say. It will almost be like a disconnect between what you have said and what you would have wanted to say. That would be true to yourself. And the worst part about this is that the person you're saying this to can feel it, you can feel it. And it achieves nothing. It just leads to really superficial conversations. And you leave out of this exchange feeling dissatisfied and exhausted. So I'll come back to this train of thought of superficial conversations in a bit, but for now, continuing on the reading part, the true benefit of reading lies in thinking about a book, or writing about it, writing your thoughts about the book, or writing what you think you've learned about the book. Because unless you've done that, you've never really grown, and you haven't really taken the benefits of reading a book. Because think about it, you just have an illusion that you are more educated, or that you learned from the book, and now you know this. Think about movies, right? Movies engage all of your more senses than reading does. It captures what you're seeing, it captures what you're hearing, and some emotions that you're feeling because you're viewing these visuals, and it almost feels real. And yet, you could be rewatching a movie that you've already watched, and you know the characters, they seem familiar, and you know the settings seem familiar too, but you are simply unable to predict what happens next. You're simply unable to remember the plot and what the characters are going to say. And if something that's so engaging to your senses is still so easily forgotten, you can only imagine what happens with books. So basically, you can't skip writing down, or at least thinking and speaking out loud and recording it, what you have just encountered or what you just think, because that's the only way to articulate yourself, or to be able to articulate yourself. It's an exercise, it's something that you sharpen, it's not something that just happens. We often think about so many things and so many ideas when something comes up, and our brain just thinks way faster than we can speak. But because our brain is thinking so fast about so many different things, it gives us the illusion that we know something about a topic and that we should be talking about it and just conveying these ideas. But as soon as we start speaking, we can quickly catch the huge gaps in our knowledge about this topic or in what we wanted to say, which ends up in us blabbering just to save face, because we realize how dumb what we just started is. You just pull together pieces of random information that you've seen or heard or read, and that too on social media, like not even like a legit news source or an article. You pull up this information from TikToks, and like a topic comes up and we're like, well, we need to give our opinion on this, and it's like, oh, do you know X% of people are doing Y? And then when asked a follow-up question or asked to substantiate what we just said, we have nothing to say. It's all a load of crap because we can't even remember where we saw this or what we read and what's the legitimacy of this thought or opinion, because we didn't even think before we spoke. Which is, I think, and the problem is where it all gets messed up, especially for us as a generation where we are spending so much time online and so many sources of content that we mindlessly consume, and to make this worse, our brains have recency bias and our brains have recency bias and repetition bias. So if something has been said on social media over and over again, and just simply been exposed to this train of thought, we could fully go into defending this opinion without ever articulating why, or thinking about why, or being educated about why. And same in recency, so you could just like regurgitate something a reel that you just watched yesterday and it happens to be somehow related to the topic we discussed, and you're like, yeah. And then you realize how absolutely unnecessary that was. So yeah, you have to practice speaking or writing or whatever form you choose. This podcast is a sort of selfish exercise in doing this for myself, like recording this podcast and forcing myself to articulate what I want to say on the topic in real time. And I'm not doing so good at it. but that's the point. The point is that I want to keep doing this till I can one day just pick up a camera and speak fluently and coherently and bring up logical arguments without fumbling. It kind of leads me to the next point, and sort of a thing that I do not like, or I find to be true in this generation, which is that not many people speak their truth. Not many people speak from their own perspective, from their own life experience. And part of this can be regarded to the fact that we have so much content online and so many different lives and day in the life of, and so many different experts giving their opinion, that we have this illusion that makes us think that we don't need to go out and seek these experiences for ourselves, or that simply by listening to them and not even thinking about it, that we still know about it, like we still are educated on it, or we still are articulate, or are able to speak on a certain given topic, which is simply not true. And it's also a very unfulfilling pursuit. If you, no matter where you are in life or who you are, I'm pretty sure you've had experiences that are valuable. But in today's world here, we are almost forced, or like, just referring back to the bias I spoke about, which is repetition bias, we might see an opinion online, and just because we see it from enough people, we think that that's the majority's opinion, which then leads into you being silent about your opinion because you don't want to be ostracized for it, you don't want to be cancelled for it. But, that's kind of, what was her name? It was a woman. I'm not sure if her name was Elizabeth, but she came up with this spiral of silence theory, and right now I digress a bit, but essentially what the theory says is that as humans we want to belong to the tribe, and so the spiral of silence theory goes along the lines that just because you think that one opinion is a popular opinion, you silence your truth because you don't want to be ostracized by it. But it could totally be that everyone else also has a different opinion, but just because they all thought that everyone was thinking the same thing, that they also confirmed to it. So you can really control narratives, but anyway, that's a different topic. Let's get back to being articulate and educated. And so you as a human, you're a human being, like your consciousness experiencing the whole world. You have this whole rich world inside of you. Your upbringing, the way you see things, your perspective, all of the world's inputs, and thought in itself. You don't think in words. Like, it's something unexplainable. Words are simply a shroud of what you use when you communicate or try to communicate what's happening inside of you with another listener. But without that, your brain can still think. If you didn't have language, if you don't think in English. The brain has its own language. I think it was Steven Pinker who came up with the word mental ease, but to give you some sort of understanding of what I'm trying to say is the fact that you think in like some brain language that cannot exactly be quantified or written in written language or English. And brain language exists even without English, but you simply use the help of English to try to translate brain language to another listener. And that should lead you to acknowledging the fact that you can never truly do that. Like, you can never truly fully communicate the richness of thought, the richness of all the experiences you've ever had in these simple words. It's like trying to describe a beautiful, colorful painting with just the words black and white. Like, of course, and then this is like becoming articulate. How well can you describe it in black and white? So you can't, obviously, without practice, describe all the shades. Like, for instance, there's like a beautiful, colorful house, let's say, and initially you could only describe like, okay, it's a black outline, it's a triangle, and then a square, and the back is white. But with practice, you could go to the extent of, okay, draw another square and shade it a little light shade of black, and then next one make it a little bit darker. Like, you can come up to a more accurate representation of what you're trying to depict. And And it's so important. This skill is so important because think about it, it's the only way that anybody else will ever know what's going on in your mind. It's literally the bridge between you and the rest of the world, and what you want to get, and what you want to do. And so it's of such importance to develop this bridge, build it, whatever you want to call it. Speech is just such a low bandwidth mechanism with which we communicate, and you should realize that. You should realize the limitations of our abilities to communicate. And just because we have such a low bandwidth mechanism, that's the only way to communicate, that we should really work on making the best of it, pushing it to its limits, and trying our best to utilize it. And just on the note of experiences, I would like to add the fact that, we have this illusion that we're learning just because there's so much entertainment out there to consume, and forces or really just motivate us to stay in the same place, not think for ourselves, not introspect. But it's your superpower. Like, you're giving away so much power simply by being so passive about it, by letting other people word what you want to say, or what you experience, or what you think, or what you feel. Yeah. Now, coming back to becoming articulate, I think that the perfect analogy I can use for this human consciousness, a really abstract concept of everything you've experienced and trying to communicate that, is by using the analogy of Inside Out. I do not know how many of you have watched this movie, but just Google it if you don't get the reference. But essentially in the first series, at least the second one is not as good. I wouldn't recommend watching the second one. The first one, hell yes. Anyway, the deeper concept, or the deeper meaning, or what I want to refer to in this context, is in Inside Out, the girl has these core memories, or these like little bubbles in her head of like every experience she's experienced, and they're like different bubbles, and it's like what she's felt, and a memory, and what someone said, and they are all like these small little glass bubbles. Anyway, so imagine that someone comes to you, or it's a situation, and a topic comes up. And as soon as a topic comes up, it's like a very general word, or like a very, like an umbrella almost. And then there's so many different little balls inside your brain that light up because they're relevant, because they're somehow kind of relevant. And then they all just come flooding into your consciousness. And the whole reason we fumble is because once the balls come flooding in our consciousness, we can't output them in a way that makes sense. We can't structure them fast enough in a way that makes sense. And so becoming articulate is the ability to put all these different balls in a way that makes sense and really fast. And you cannot do this unless you practice it, because unless you output, there's so much input in your brain already. You can't assume by some magic that the output is going to come. The thinking or the logic is going to remain unclear unless you practice the output. Unless every time this comes up, you kind of think about it and you write it down, or for the case of being coherent or articulate, you can just pick one of the balls and then unpack that, instead of trying to piece together all the things you're thinking about, because I know that we all can think a lot of things, because we are just amazing human beings with so many different little balls that connect in such different ways, and that's the beauty of it. But anyway, the point of being able to communicate that is through practice. Clear thinking and clear output is a result of consistent thought. It's a result of forcing your brain to output, and then making it unfoggy and cleaning it up, and then piecing it together. And then as you go by with life or in conversations, you get there. Coming back to the inside-out circle analogy, if we must. The more you think, the more you output, the stronger the connections between these balls that you have inside your brain, bubbles, become stronger, and the better your ability to communicate, and the better your ability to view the world, and to let others know how you're viewing the world. So once again, being articulate makes you so powerful, because think about it, it's the only way that you can communicate with the world who you are. Of course, it can be argued that you can also, people can understand you, what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you're trying to say through body language or your tonality or some other form or art of perceiving someone, but that gives away your power, because then it leaves what you're trying to say up to interpretation, up to people's interpretation of you. You don't really have control over it. But instead, I know that can also be argued that with words, your words are still open to interpretation, but the extent to which is heavily reduced. Like, statistically speaking, I can't put a number to it, but your likelihood of being misunderstood is lesser through words, or like you're going to be misunderstood to a lesser extent with words than you would be another form of interpretation or body language or whatever that is. Okay, so now I'd like to go back to what I mentioned earlier in this conversation, which is about having really superficial conversations that lack depth and authenticity. And once again, being well educated and well articulated ties into feeling true or feeling connected with the words that you say. And the problem is that most of us don't even have any values to connect with. We have never thought, have you ever thought about the fact that you should have some values about speaking? Before you speak, before you communicate with the world, you should have some values, like a prism of values through which you filter your thoughts out into the world, because that's how you want to be, because that's your value, and that's how you're communicating with the world. And I think that most of us these days have never even thought about what our values could be while communicating or while speaking. And more importantly, that leads to very shallow conversations, because that leads to really neurotic thinking in our generation as well. Because people just simply like to repeat what they've seen, like an Instagram quote they've read or an opinion they've heard, and when asked to defend it, they find themselves stuttering because they can't. And there's a lot of values that you could pick. I'm just going to pick one of mine, for instance. And this is a tough one because I struggle with it. But one of my values for speaking is to speak honestly. And I struggle with this not because I'm a dishonest person, but because I'm more of a people pleaser. And so anytime I'm communicating with someone, I find the urge to mellow my opinions or withhold my opinion on something, because the person who's talking to me holds a very different opinion, and I do not wish to offend them, and I do not wish to go against them or hurt them or argue with them. I'm also non-confrontational. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is that just because, for instance, I have two paths, right? If my value isn't honesty, what I could do is continue the conversation and pretend to go along with what the person is saying. But this creates a disconnect, because there's what I wanted to say, what I have said, and what I really think. And it's all going in different directions. So when the person is speaking to me, what could have been an honest conversation, a stimulating conversation that could have made me feel connected to this person, now my brain's stuck on what I would have wanted to say or what I still think. And the other person continues their line of thought. It's not fair to the other person either. Like, nobody's asking to protect, people ask. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that by not having any values, I am setting myself up for failure in the way that I just mentioned. But by having honesty as a value through which I speak, it is true that someone can have an opposing opinion, and it is true that I can have an opinion that is contradictory to it, that might lead to hurt, or that might lead to unpleasant feelings or confrontation, or going into deeper depth about this topic, or coming to a conclusion, but that is the way to go, because my value is honesty. So I'm going to value honesty over people pleasing, or I'm going to value honesty over protecting this person's political views, for instance. Another value of mine when I'm speaking is being authentic. And this is why I chose this form of podcast, sitting in my bed and like talking to a friend, because I do not find myself, or I do not find the ability to be able to be my authentic self, because I'm still scared of like the spiral of silence where my opinion could be rejected by the mass audience. And if I was going to be like recording a podcast where I know that the audience is a mass group of people, that I would not be authentic to myself, that I would truly not be authentic to what I want to say, just because I would be thinking about the audience and what would appeal to them. But that's not a quality that I want to embody, or that's not a quality that I want in my way of speaking, which is why I decided this format of podcast, because my only goal is not to become a public speaker, but rather a good communicator with the people that I wish to be close to me. And which is why I imagine this camera to be like a friend, sitting in bed, chilling and having a deep talk, a pillow talk. And the only way to become articulate, the first action step that you can take like today, is to come up with a list of values with which you want to communicate with the world. What do you think about what you want? You can cherry pick anything. The world is yours. And once you have those values, you have a compass with which to navigate speech. And that in itself simplifies things. So this podcast is a bit of a selfish exercise in me becoming more articulate myself and practicing my values more when it comes to speaking. I just said that's like the opposite of being articulate. It's so silly. Anyway, so yeah, this podcast, in all honesty, is a selfish exercise, but the only thing that I hope that this achieves, if anybody is watching this, if anybody ends up on this video, is that I hope to inspire you or implore you to explore all the ways in which you are you, and all your opinions, all your thoughts. And nobody can do this for you. Like, nobody can answer your burning questions for you. It's just you. Because you are this whole different individual. And people can advise you, but it's never going to be as good as the answer that you can come for yourself. And so I hope that through these episodes, you think about these topics for yourself, and you decide for yourself what's important to you, and you decide for yourself how you want to lead your life. But anyway, now I digress. The only value that I can add to your life is to implore you to explore yourself. You're not going to become more articulate simply by watching this video, or any other video for that matter. You will only become so by practicing, by exercising, and you can choose whatever form you want to do. There's podcasts, there's writing, there's journaling, there's speaking to yourself or to an audience. And as Elizabeth said, when you set out in this world to help yourself, sometimes you end up helping tutti, which means everyone in Italian. That's my hope for this podcast. By helping myself, I end up helping others help themselves. So what can you take away from this podcast? It is to not ignore your deep truths, to be true to yourself, and the biggest actionable step is to lead with values. Define what your values are before you even attempt to communicate with the rest of the world what you're trying to say. Because without values, you do not have any compass, and a compass you lose your way and fumble, and that's what you do not wish to do. I'm assuming if you stayed this long in this video. This is the co-host of this podcast. Bye bye. Bye bye. Thank you for watching. To end this really wonderful first episode, I would like to do so with a stance from a poem. Even though I talked all about how you shouldn't let other people decide your opinion and articulate your opinions, I think it is pretty apt. And it goes, do not go gentle into that good night. Rage against the dying of the light.